Hi, and welcome to One Chapter Closer, the audiobook channel that helps you experience one chapter at a time. Whether you're here to relax, learn, or enjoy great stories, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's chapter and take one step closer to the end of the book.
Application number 6. The secrets to saying we're sorry. Key insight. Many of the skills we've covered in this book have helped you to put your best foot forward when speaking spontaneously. But what happens when you make a mistake? How can you best address and manage a situation when you have somehow caused offense or behaved improperly? Knowing how to apologize well is a useful skill to have, especially when we try to take more risks in spontaneous situations and let our true selves shine. But so many of us don't know the secrets to saying we're sorry. If we've caused offense to others, we worsen the situation by apologizing poorly, inappropriately, or not at all. Others come away feeling frustrated and perceive us as tone-deaf, insincere, or disrespectful. Rather than effectively communicating with an audience in a way that forms connection and collaboration, failing to address missteps when they inevitably occur can lead to conflict and resentment. We can avoid this outcome by understanding the key components of a meaningful apology and weaving them together into a single, coherent framework. Why it matters. Never apologize, Mr. It's a sign of weakness. Thus opined a character played by John Wayne in the 1949 film She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. It's a classic misconception, one adopted by some public figures today who either refrain from offering apologies or do so only reluctantly. To be clear, apologizing is not a sign of weakness. It's an act of courage and strength. It shows that we care about our relationships, even those we have with acquaintances and strangers, and are willing to set aside our own ego for the sake of creating a comfortable and constructive environment for everyone. Apologies can serve a variety of purposes in the context of relationships. Most obviously, they can reduce the anger and frustration that others feel toward us and reduce the chances that they'll try to get even. They can reassure others that we won't repeat our offending behavior, in the process inviting trust and future interactions. A well-crafted apology can help others see that we're not really jerks, and that our bad behavior was situational. We meant well but on this occasion weren't able to behave at our best. Apologies can also help us to project empathy and deepen our connection with the person we've offended. Craft your content. To ensure that your apology hits the mark, structure it using a formula that I call AAA. Think of it as emergency roadside assistance. It's useful to have when you're in a bind. The formula is as follows. A. Acknowledge. First, identify the offending behavior and take responsibility for it. A. Appreciate. Second, publicly accept how your offense has impacted others. A. Amends. Third, detail how you will make up for your offense, specifying what action you will take or refrain from taking to remedy the situation, or how your thinking will change. There is no one-size-fits-all apology that works for all situations. Individuals whom we've wronged will evaluate our apology in light of how serious our misdeeds and their impacts are. Although a well-structured apology might suffice if we happen to have come 5 minutes late to a meeting, it might not if we've inadvertently insulted or embarrassed someone. Regardless of the seriousness of our transgressions, those whom we've hurt want to see us own up to what we've done, acknowledge the impact it has had on them, particularly on an emotional level, and understand how we intend to make amends. By combining these 3 elements into a structure, we can ensure that every apology we offer stands the best chance of smoothing over hurt feelings and projecting our empathy. Let's take a closer look at these elements and how to execute them. Step number 1. Acknowledge the action and accept responsibility. We often hear people utter non-apologies that never acknowledge the action or take clear responsibility. They might say, "I'm sorry if what I said offended you," as if everything we said was fine and reasonable people probably wouldn't take offense at our remarks. They might say, "I sometimes don't think before speaking," failing to directly specify that they are apologizing for a specific remark that caused offense. They might say, "I'm sorry for offending you, but I was upset because of what you said about me," offering an explanation that seems to blame others or the situation at hand and excuse themselves of all or some of the responsibility. Don't try to justify, minimize, or explain away your behavior when issuing an apology. Don't apologize for how you made someone feel. You need to own what you actually did or did not do for an apology to land. Clearly describe the action that you took or failed to take. Be specific. Don't hide behind generalities. Remember, apologizing takes courage. Don't wiggle out by offering a subtle or slippery non-apology. Examples. I'm sorry that I waited until the last minute to test the system out. I apologize for using only male pronouns and names in my. Examples. I'm sorry I questioned your commitment to our project in front of others. Step number 2, appreciate the impact. Once you've specified an action that you regret, you can now project empathy for others. You should make it clear that your action wasn't only wrong but also damaging in some way. You should show others that you understand the full impact and consequences of your action or inaction, including the emotional consequences it had for the people you've wronged. You might feel tempted to minimize your impact, but this would be a big mistake. The person harmed by your action or inaction bears the emotional brunt of what you've done. Any attempt to put it into perspective not only devalues their reaction, but also serves to reduce your burden. In apologizing to your teenage child, you might tell them that it was no big deal when you pecked them on the cheek in front of their friends while dropping them off at school. But you must remember that this little kiss might well be a big deal to them, causing them to lose social status and feel embarrassed. You come across as defensive and insensitive, perhaps making the situation even worse. In any situation when you're extending an apology, you should show, as best you can, that you really do get why your behavior was so problematic and hurtful. Examples. Having to wait for a lengthy software upgrade to install cut into valuable work time that you needed for your project. Using masculine terminology diminishes the value of women's contributions to this work and is demotivating. By questioning your commitment publicly, I made you look bad in front of the team and implied that your contribution was less valuable than those of others on the team. Step number 3, detail how you will make amends. If you take responsibility for a misdeed and acknowledge its effects but don't signal your willingness to make amends, your apology won't carry much weight. Poorly led companies make this mistake all the time. They project empathy and take responsibility when their products fail and cause harm, but then they offer only vague statements about their intention to do better. They don't lay out clear steps that they plan to take. Somehow, nothing ever seems to change. This in turn causes customers to lose faith in these companies and become cynical. Avoid damaging your relationships by specifying what you'll do in the immediate future to reduce the chances that your offense will happen again. By being specific, you show the person you've wronged that you're serious about making amends, and you implicitly invite them to hold you accountable. Examples. To avoid this happening again, I will test the system 1 hour before we do our demonstrations. And I will do this starting next week. Before our next meeting, I will be sure to find a more diverse set of examples to use so that I don't rely just male stories and names. The next time I have any issues with your performance, I'll speak to you in private about it. Refine your remarks. Using AAA to frame your apologies allows you and the person you've wronged to process what happened effectively and productively. Yet, it's not enough to simply get the structure right. How and when we deliver it matters as well. Here are some further thoughts on how you might enhance your use of AAA and improve the impact of your apologies. Tip number 1, don't pre-apologize. If you're entering a situation in which you think you might make a misstep, it can be tempting to try to cut your losses by asking for forgiveness first. You might say, I might wind up being 30 minutes late, so let me apologize in advance. Or perhaps, I'm going to be very busy networking during the cocktail party, so please excuse me if I ignore you. Or I have a lot of material here, so our Zoom might run long. Or I am really nervous, I apologize in advance if I stumble over my words. Although you might intend such pre-apologies to show your regard for the other person's feelings, these statements usually backfire. They typically leave the other person wondering about your sincerity. If you know that your timing isn't aligned with the scheduled meeting time, why did you not adjust for that ahead of time or edit your presentation to fit the time allotted? If you really cared about their feelings, wouldn't you modify your behavior? A pre-apology also serves to draw your audience's attention to your offense, leading them to look for it and remember it more when it happens. If you suspect you might offend someone, clarify your priorities in your own mind. If you can change your plans or behavior without inconveniencing yourself unduly so that you don't cause offense, do it. If you can't, do your best and apologize after the fact. Tip number 2. Don't wait too long to apologize. It's true that it's better to apologize late than not at all, and situational factors can prevent you from apologizing right away. If you disrespected a colleague by speaking over them at a meeting with the CEO, it might be safest to wait until after the meeting to say something rather than in the moment. If you said something insulting to your child while seeing them off to school, you might have to wait until they get home that evening to make it right. In general, though, as I suggested when discussing feedback, the sooner we can apologize after our offending act, the better. That way, we can prevent resentment and anger from festering. If we apologize so quickly that others actually see us catching ourselves in the act of making a mistake and then taking responsibility, we might leave them with a clearer sense of our good intentions. A timely apology also relieves us of the stress that can come from that nagging sense that we've wronged someone. By saying something promptly, we can both move on. Tip number 3. Be specific, clear, and brief. When it comes to apologies, just enough is usually plenty. When we feel guilty about something we've done, the anxiety over how it made us look or made other people feel can sometimes become overpowering. We may be mortified about what happened and feel anxious about the damage we've done, so we keep apologizing profusely in hopes of driving home our point. Repeating an apology might make us feel better in the moment, but the person we've wronged might find it annoying or even potentially harassing. By overemphasizing what we've done, we risk inflating it in the other person's mind, causing them to become more offended than they otherwise might have been. If we're accurately assessing the damage we've done, over-apologizing may not give the other person a chance to cool down, making the situation worse. As hard as it might be, we should deliver a single, well-structured, sincere apology, and leave it at that. We should trust that the other person will also be gracious and reasonable enough to accept our contrition, if not in the moment, then later once they've had a chance to process and get a little distance. We can over-apologize by repeating the same apology repetitively, and we can also do so by feeling compelled to apologize for our tiniest missteps. Every perceived transgression on our part, however minute, doesn't merit an apology. Should we roll out the AAA framework every time we're just a minute or two late for a meeting? Should we do so when we said something that is true, perfectly reasonable, and well-intentioned, but that we fear might not have landed precisely right? If we offer apologies all the time, they mean less. Take a balanced and thoughtful approach to apologizing. When you feel pretty certain that you've overstepped in a meaningful way, offer a meaningful response. Treating others the way you would want to be treated is probably a pretty good rule to follow. Application in action. The AAA framework serves us in a wide range of situations and for transgressions big and small. For a sense of how we might best apply it, consider the following scenarios. Scenario number 1. Times are tough at work, and the stress has gotten to you. You lost your temper and reacted poorly in a meeting, showing disrespect to a colleague. Later that afternoon, you run into the colleague in a hallway and notice that they are upset. A possible response: I'm very sorry that I raised my voice and cut you off when you were explaining your point of view. That was wrong of me, acknowledge. I know that my argumentativeness is unacceptable, and that it reduces how comfortable and collaborative people on our team feel, appreciate. Starting today, when I become really passionate, I'll wait my turn, speak more quietly, and summarize what I heard others say before I contribute my perspective. Action. The speaker here doesn't attempt to excuse their behavior. They simply delineate what they did that caused offense. In describing the impact, they reference not just how the offended party might have been affected, but also the negative consequences for the entire team. This increases the odds that the person who was offended will perceive that the speaker understands fully how damaging their behavior was. Further, it's important to avoid public shaming and private apologizing. In this situation, a public, timely apology would make a big difference. Scenario number 2. You're collaborating on a project with a colleague whose native language is different than yours. Because of the language gap, you stop asking this person for input, and they express frustration at being left out. A possible response: I'm sorry. I was struggling to understand what you were saying and began to listen to and seek advice from others. Acknowledge: I understand that this left you out of the conversation, which couldn't have felt good. Appreciate. Let me ask everyone next time to contribute ideas in the chat window so that I can see everyone's contributions equally. That way, I will be able to concentrate more and better understand what you and everyone else is saying. Action. In this situation, the speaker's goal is a practical one: to ensure that everyone feels comfortable contributing, even though it's sometimes hard to understand what people who are not native speakers are saying. Note that the second step conveys empathy, but in a subtle way. The speaker acknowledges that being left out of the conversation would have felt off-putting and perhaps even insulting. Scenario number 3. You're on a virtual call taking part in a high-pressure business meeting and are feeling nervous. You just realize to your distress that you mispronounced a person's name. You don't want to make a big deal of it, but you feel the need to apologize. A possible response: I apologize for not saying your name correctly. How do you pronounce it? Acknowledge: I can imagine that it feels uncomfortable to be called by the wrong name and that it might be challenging to correct me. Appreciate. In the future, I will look over the list of participants and ask about pronunciations prior to starting the meeting. Action. In this situation, it's important that the speaker not only recognize publicly that they made the mistake, but that they also ask for the proper way to say the person's name. Doing so shows that the speaker is interested in fixing their mistake, and it also ensures that nobody else will repeat the mistake. Acknowledging the error as well as the potential discomfort in correcting it is key. Parting thought. Not long ago, I made a fairly significant faux pas while teaching a communication course with a colleague. We were discussing how important it is to provide context for the data we present, since audiences can find it numbing to encounter a stream of numbers without enough information to make sense or evaluate them. Not a subject that on its face would seem particularly offensive. But wait. To make the point, I told the class a story about an executive I had coached some years earlier who was a senior leader at one of the world's largest banks. As part of his presentation, he referenced the astronomical amount of money that went through his bank every day. As I told the class, I advised my client not only to mention the amount of money but to give his audience some way to understand just how large this number was. The executive did some calculations and wound up mentioning in his presentation that the sum he was referencing amounted to 25% of the world's money. In presenting this example, I initially felt quite satisfied with myself. My students would now remember better to make their own data come alive for their audiences. But then I noticed one of my students folding his arms in front of him and scowling at the wall. For the rest of the class, this normally passionate and talkative student stayed silent and pensive. Something I had said landed badly with my audience. After class, I approached him to ask if everything was okay. He told me he had just had his house foreclosed on by the very bank I had used in my example. Hearing how much money went through the bank every day reminded him of a very difficult personal situation and made him feel worse about it. I felt badly and offered up an apology using the AAA framework. I said that I was very sorry for mentioning the bank and their revenue. I told him that I understood how my example could have brought up negative emotions for him, and I promised to be as careful as I could in the future about avoiding examples that might feel painful or uncomfortable to my audience. Without a structure to fall back on, I might have left out parts of the message that I wanted to convey, or I might have rambled on and on. The AAA structure helped me to focus and provide a quick and concise apology, one that emphasized how my offense impacted my student. Appreciating my sensitivity and the timeliness of my response, my student quickly forgave me. During the next class, he was again engaged and enthusiastic. I, too, had learned a valuable lesson. All of us make mistakes, which means that all of us stand to gain by learning the secrets of saying sorry. The AAA framework challenges us to behave empathetically and responsibly when we mess up, regardless of the emotions we might feel in the moment. It prompts us to step up, put our defensiveness and egos aside, and show a bit of humility and self-awareness as we mend a breach in our relationships. Contrary to popular belief, apologizing isn't weakness. Rather, it's one of the best ways available to us to show that we care and are striving to improve. Epilogue. During the summer of 2022, a former student of mine, the Australian swimmer Annabelle Williams, found herself in a spontaneous communications situation that most people would find nightmarish and impossible to handle. A Paralympic gold medalist who set 5 world records, Williams was serving as a color commentator on live television for swimming events held as part of the Commonwealth Games. One day, she received an urgent phone call from her network. A colleague was unexpectedly out, and Williams' boss wanted her to fill in at the last minute as co-host of its primetime broadcast. This was a breakout opportunity for Williams. She had never co-hosted a primetime broadcast. This portion of the coverage had a large audience, more than 1 million viewers. She felt anxious. Commentators typically spend weeks doing research in preparation for hosting a major sporting event. That way, when action takes place or there is dead time to fill and they have to respond, they can quickly think of something interesting to say. Williams had done extensive research on the swimming competitions, but as co-host of the main broadcast, she would have to cover and comment on a range of sports. She'd be going in cold, with little more than her general knowledge of athletics to go on. Williams agreed to step in, since her first appearance would take place later that day. She had only 4 hours to prepare. Putting her 2 young children in her mother's care, she raced around the television studio, doing her best to coordinate her wardrobe and makeup and to run through the broadcast schedule with the network's production team. To help ease her nerves, she decided to write her opening remarks and read them off a teleprompter. She anticipated that once those first few minutes were behind her, she would get in the groove and be fine. That evening, Williams was calm and in control as her male co-host welcomed her onto the show. But a moment later, when the lights came on and the cameras were live, disaster struck. Her co-host read the text on the teleprompter that she had prepared. She looked for any text that he had created, but there was none. The screen was blank. For the next few moments, as over 1 million viewers looked on, Williams would somehow have to talk spontaneously about beach volleyball and the 100-meter hurdles race, events about which she knew next to nothing. Williams' quandary was an extreme one. Most of us never find ourselves on the world stage having to test our skills the way she did. But as we've seen in this book, high-pressure spontaneous speaking opportunities arise every day, in a wide array of social contexts. Without warning, we are called to step up and express ourselves before colleagues, bosses, customers, family members, and even total strangers. Although our own fears and past experiences can make such moments feel daunting, they need not prevent us from thriving in the moment. No matter how affable, sociable, and facile with words we perceive ourselves to be, we can all become more comfortable and confident in the moment by employing the think faster, talk smarter method I've outlined, as well as the context-specific structures I've provided. This method, as we've seen, has 6 steps. First, we must acknowledge what we already know, that communication, in general, and impromptu speaking in particular, is nerve-wracking. We must create a personalized anxiety management plan to help address our jitters. Second, we must reflect on our approach to communication and how we judge ourselves and others, seeing these situations as opportunities for connection and collaboration. Unlock. Third, we must give ourselves permission to adopt new mindsets, take risks, and re-envision mistakes as mistakes. Redefine. Fourth, we must listen deeply to what others are saying and perhaps not saying, while also tuning into our own internal voice and intuition. Listen. Fifth, we must leverage story structure to make our ideas more intelligible, sharper, and compelling than they might otherwise have been. Structure. And sixth, we must focus audiences as much as possible on the essence of what we're saying, cultivating precision, relevance, accessibility, and concision. Focus. We can perform some of the work that these 6 steps require in the moment as we're speaking by adopting a range of helpful tactics. But more fundamentally, these 6 steps represent skills that we must cultivate over time as we prepare for spontaneous situations we think we're likely to have. Many people presume that speaking well when put on the spot requires natural talent, quick-wittedness, or the gift of gab. While some of us certainly possess these talents, the real secret to spontaneous speaking is practice and preparation. All of us can become strong speakers in the moment if we put in the time, learn to break old habits, and exercise more deliberate choices. Paradoxically, we have to prepare in advance to do well in spontaneous situations, working hard on skills that we know will free us up to bring out our ideas and personalities to the fullest. As when learning any new skill, it helps to reduce the pressure you put on yourself. You don't have to stress yourself out trying to master spontaneous communication all at once. Moreover, the very fact that you're focusing on improving yourself in this way is already worth celebrating. Most people either don't think about spontaneous speaking, or if they do, they aren't courageous enough to do anything about it. You are aware and brave, as evidenced by the fact that you picked up this book in the first place. I'm also willing to bet that you've already begun to make progress. Reading through this book and trying a few of its exercises has hopefully made you just a bit better at relaxing and communicating in impromptu situations. I invite you during the weeks, months, and years ahead to continue to focus on spontaneous communication and practice the skills we've discussed. Try to put yourself into social situations where you can experiment with some of the skills and techniques. Don't test yourself in this way just once or occasionally. Mindfully practice multiple times a week if you can. Consider taking an improvisational comedy class, even if you don't aspire to become the next cast member of Saturday Night Live. Join Toastmasters, listen to podcasts like mine, take online courses, and get feedback on your progress from trusted friends. This book is just a beginning, and it can serve to launch you on an ongoing process of growth and development as a communicator. I hope you'll return to this book often as you proceed in your efforts or need a refresher. As I think you'll find, once you start making progress, you'll see the value of thinking faster and talking smarter and feel energized to continue. Becoming adept at spontaneous communication takes patience, commitment, and grace, but as the people I coach and teach have found, the impact can be life-changing. Annabelle Williams is a great example. She didn't freeze up and wither under the pressure of having to communicate spontaneously in front of a live television audience. Because she had already spent years learning how to handle her anxieties, reframe communication tasks in helpful ways, and speak in a focused manner, she had the confidence to adapt quickly in this unexpected situation and make it through. Staying calm, she thought of a couple stray facts she happened to know about beach volleyball and the 100-meter hurdles race. Reframing this difficult moment as an opportunity to share these facts, she improvised some quick remarks. Then she transitioned the broadcast over to a live, on-the-ground interview and everything was fine. The moment had passed and she'd done well. She wound up serving as primetime co-host for the final 4 nights of the Commonwealth Games broadcast, an experience that she found exhilarating and, as she put it, brilliant one. Who knows where this success will take her next? I'd like to close with a small story that holds a big place in my heart. When I got my first black belt, my sensei shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, you did very well. Now, let's get started." I thought that receiving a black belt was an enormous accomplishment, the culmination of a long period of study. In truth, it was just the first step. There was an infinite amount still to learn. Spontaneous communication is like this. Congratulations. You made it through this book. You know more about how to stay in the moment, project your personality, and communicate under the spotlight's glare.
Thank you for listening to this chapter on One Chapter Closer. Congratulations on being one step closer to completing the book. Don't forget to check out our channel for more specially curated audiobooks. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on new releases. See you in the next chapter.